Well, welcome back to the ESOT Congress 2023 TV Studio. I'm Jackie Thornton with a fantastic panel. We've just heard the opening plenary session in the fantastic hall here in Athens, and it was packed out. Everyone listening to disruptive innovation, which is one of the themes of this year's Congress. So I have with me Gabby Ionescu, who has just been appointed as president of ESOT. Congratulations to you, Gabby. As you know, Gabby is a transplant surgeon at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. And we have with us other people who are on the panel. We have John Noster, who gave the first keynote speech. John describes himself as a contrarian, so we'll see.
No, I'm not. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Got it.
John is, as I say, from the US. He's an innovation theorist and founder of the Noster Lab think tank. So welcome to you. I know
Pleasure.
You've just flown here from the US, so we appreciate it. I'm sure next to me, Donna Cryer, I think you've also come from the US. You're a US lawyer. You're an advocate as a founder of the Global Liver Institute, and actually 28 years ago, you had a liver transplant. So thank you very much indeed for coming to speak to us today. And we also have Tobias Dexel, who is from Stockholm. He is also a creativity expert. You're CEO of Combiner, and you're an aficionado, this is what you spoke of mostly this afternoon, of Nobel, not winners,
Nobel laureates.
Nobel laureates. So thank you and welcome to our panel. So Gabby, you've chosen this panel as one of your first jobs as president. What were behind the choices, and what were the standout moments for you from this afternoon's opening session?
Wow, so many questions, Jackie. So I really wanted an outstanding panel that will kick off the Congress with a bang, because that's the traditional ESOT DNA. And what I wanted a journey in this plenary, because we are moving in a post-pandemic world. We have clearly seen the benefit of innovation, potentially, but we need to consider how that affects patients and how we bring those two together. And I think that's a difficult mix, and this is the challenge of this Congress, and hopefully we'll have some answers. And finally, one thing we learned in the pandemic is collaboration, which accelerated progress massively. And humans are interesting beings because they tend to forget. And I think what I don't want to do that is, in the field, we want to keep on going with this collaboration and keep the creativity. So I found Tobias, and they all did a fantastic job because it flew very nicely. So I don't think I can pick up a moment. But one thing I can pick up is that everyone spoke about the need to innovate. Everyone spoke about the need to put the patient at the focus of everything else. And I think building bridges is probably the best metaphor of all, because now we are building bridges within professional teams, but also with patients. And I think we need to think well outside the box, Tobias, and sort of not within being constraints. I think we have to go where creativity takes us.
Thanks, Gabby. I want to turn to, forgive me, Donna, to the two gentlemen who know, I don't mean to sound rude, I was going to say know the least about transplantation, certainly on the panel, because you don't have a lived experience of it like Donna, who's also an advocate, and Gabby obviously is working within the field. So this is a relatively new area, although I think, John, you do a lot of healthcare.
Yes.
So, I mean, what did you take from what the speakers said? What are your thoughts about how we can move forward in this post-COVID world, as Gabby said, keeping on some of the changes that have been made?
Well, I think that there's an element of momentum, which is clearly important. We have to keep pushing forward and moving forward. But for me, I think probably the most important area is that we can't wait for technology to change us. It's going to change you whether you like it or not. We have to become active participants in technology to embrace it, to understand and foster it moving forward. And to me, that's really at the center of this transformation. Now, interestingly, as a techno-optimist and someone who's really kind of follows technology, I begin to struggle with the term patient centricity. Everything we do, we put the patient at the center of care. I think that we are moving into a technology-centric dynamic, believe it or not, where technology becomes the fundamental and critical driver of change. We are patient-infused. We're patient-infused. We're not taking our eye off the patient, but the emergence of technology, the complexity, the sophistication, and basically the fundamental genius, that genius that is shared with humanity, is a technological construct. So for me, that kind of steps out in front of the pack in an interesting way. So I rattled the cage a little bit on that one.
Okay, well, I'll come back to Donna on that. I'm sure she wants to come back a bit. But I think, what's interesting is that, Gabby talked about technology and about how actually we've, learnt a lot from COVID, and you say we've got to push forward with this. But actually, I think you also made the point that we've returned in lots of ways. We've lost a lot of those technological advances. So just talk me through that one.
There's a professor that I spoke of, Stephen Jay Gould, a former professor at Harvard, who talked about punctuated equilibrium. He said that nothing happens, then an asteroid hits the Earth and the dinosaurs die. That seems to be part of the dynamic of innovation, and many people thought that COVID was the asteroid. But as we look at clinical care patterns, things like telemedicine, we're finding that they're going back to baseline. And my argument is that AI, particularly in the development and the emergence of the GPT, large language models, is actually the asteroid that's going to push us into new territory.
I'm going to come back to that because I was intrigued by some of the things you said. But let me give Donna a chance to come back to your point.
Yep.
We are. He says we're already patient infused, and what we need to do is put technology
I
at the
said that
centre.
just for Donna, though.
He did.
Yeah.
He knows that I feel patient infused is sort of like that water that doesn't really taste like anything and that you drink when you're supposed to be on a diet. I do agree, though, that patient-centered is a term that has lost its meaning, has lost its way, if it ever had one. I always feel like, well, gosh, if I'm the patient, I'm at the center, that makes me feel like a target.
Right.
Can it be patient-powered? And in our case, for my organization, we are patient-led, and all of our efforts, whether this those that come under the label of scientific or whatever, are always patient-informed. So I believe that we do need different language, but I'm gonna nix infused.
Language, if you tell me about arthritis, I don't listen because that's a disease of my grandmother.
Right.
If you ask me or tell me about bone health, I'll listen.
Exactly.
And so language is so important. But
Right.
you know what?
Well,
everyone is patient-centric, right? Everyone says we are patient-centric. How many psychologists and sociologists do these large clinical structures employ to address the sociological and patient centricity dynamics? Most of us are technologists, are clinicians. So I think that's part of that reality, and maybe it's an area for improvement. But I do think it's an easy thing to say.
Gabby, come in, and then I want to hear from Tobias.
So very quickly, I think both of you have very clear thoughts about this, but actually it's not necessarily patient-centric. I agree, John. I think that's probably a wrong term to use. What about patient-driven? Because at the end of the day, what we need to do is actually put the patient firmly in the driving seat. We're the passenger. We are the ones advising, because to me, we discuss this, we need to move away from the office concept. We need to move to the continuum of care, and this is where really we can't control it. We can't say what's happening in 3 months between Donna's appointments. It's actually Donna's in charge of that, and she needs to engage with us and tell us, okay, and we provide advice. So maybe the term is wrong. I don't think we know the right term, but there's a bit of work to do there.
But Gabby, just maybe, we'll talk a lot about health literacy, and of course we've got to improve health literacy, but it's all very well having empowered patients, but if the patients aren't empowered by their own lack of literacy, then that's hard for them to. Then you're putting an emphasis on them, aren't you?
I think you will not have time in this particular session to talk about this, because for me, and we know that from previous research, that health literacy, it is the biggest factor that underpins all inequity. It's all about health literacy. It's about what patient understands, or people who need transplant, we should say that. We say it in Europe, and that's the term we like to use. What do they understand that their care means? And I think that's what the challenge is. And that transcends transplantation, goes into the core of the society about health literacy.
Yeah, well, of course, Tobias was talking about communication as one of his words that he was concentrating on. But you come back, Donna, and then I'll come to Tobias.
That's really at the core of what we do as an organization, is to ensure that patients have not just the literacy. So first there's things that often aren't in people's languages. So the fact that we have most of our materials translated into 18 different languages to hit the plain literacy, if you will, before we start loading on medical and legal terms. It's why it's always the first session in our conference for patients. And then, yes, you need the confidence, but you do need these skills, whether it's in negotiation or navigation or how the healthcare system, operates, so that you can be a full and active and useful participant in your care or in that of someone else's.
Okay. I could be provocative and say that in terms of empowering patients, sometimes, maybe not in transplantation, but the medical profession is seen as quite conservative in still wanting to tell patients what to do rather than, as you say, making it patient-driven. But, maybe not in transplantation.
I think it's everyone. That's a culture that needs to change, and I think it's going to be a long road. But we need to start somewhere.
Okay, let me. Tobias, you've been very patient. Any comments on what you've heard on so far, and what are the key points that you want to make about?
I think this is very interesting because as I see it, it's not just one thing. It's not just about technology. It's not about the patient. It's a couple of pieces. That's the big mistake that we've been doing for so many years. We think it's one thing. It's only this patient-centered or it's technology. It's a combination. Once again, it's a couple of pieces. And I don't say it like it's not like 3,000 different pieces. We need to establish what are those core pieces that we need to start combining. Because otherwise, it becomes very binary. It's like black and white, and that's not reality.
I absolutely agree. It's the reason why all of our councils are built with all of the stakeholders at the same table, listening to each other, because everybody has parts of the solution. Also needs to develop a respect for each other and that platform to be able to disrespect their other ideas, to push back. And you don't do that if you're never been in the same room talking about the same set of facts. And to your point about patient driven, if I could just, I have a story. I at one point was just hospitalized, had just gotten to the end, and I asked for all of my doctors, all of my specialists to be in the same room with me. That did not go over very well, but eventually we made that happen. And my husband, who's a physician, asked me when we got to the room, well, where are you going to sit? And I said, I'm going to sit at the head of the table. It's my meeting. It's my life. And he was like, oh, well. We were early married then. We've been married for almost 19 years now. So he understands. But that was where do you sit at the table when it's about you, when it's about getting everybody together to add their input and their expertise that I respect greatly about decisions about my life. I sit at the head of the table.
But, I tend to agree. There's a couple points that I find interesting. I'm going to lean in on this. I think that consensus is a powerful tool, but taking an intellectual average is not always a good idea. I also think that the path to health literacy, which is a very human construct, is technological. Right now, GPT can articulate organ transplant to a 67-year-old engineer with a PhD using p-values and bar charts, or to a mom who has no technical background, uniquely suited to that patient. So I believe that health literacy is a technological construct coming out of a human domain. And I'm going to go even crazy here and say that organ transplantation, the final path to organ transplantation for me, is early disease detection. If you detect the disease early, you can avoid it. Now, what is the modality of early disease detection? Technology.
Now let me pick up on that. I mean, I was going to ask you about that, the Chat GPT thing about tailoring the health literature. But what I was intrigued by, what you seem to be saying, and I come from the UK where our NHS is.
We won't hold that against you.
They're having some difficult times at the moment, and doctors are hard pressed, and there's not much time for anything. And you seem to be saying that it's hard for doctors in the time frames that they have to be as empathetic as some people might want them to be. So are you saying that ChatGPT could give the time that people want that answer all the questions that they want. Is this an additional...
I think that's a fair... Yes, I think in the final analysis, a GPT is not perfect. Just like the doctor, it is not perfect. The human construct is fraught with frailty. And so are the large language models today. We are going to advance. To look at large language models because they've been 4 or 5 months old, to hold them up in rigid evaluation isn't the best way. I would look at it as a trajectory where they're moving toward. But yeah, I think ultimately it's a very powerful tool. For my mom, and Di, you probably agree with. Sometimes it's not what the doctor says, but how the doctor says it. You know, when the doctor spoke to my mom and took her by the hand and said, "Rose, you're doing great. Let me tell you about what we're going to do." Versus the other doctor who said, "Take your pill. I'll see you in 6 months."
Yeah.
Both were correct.
And that patient probably never took that pill.
Well, my mom did
and
because
may or may
took
not
her.
have come back in 6 months.
I was the compliance driver for my mom. But you're right, they didn't. Exactly.
But in terms of Chat GPT, I mean, I've been aware of that being used to write journalistic articles, and the journalist gets, you know. But, I mean, how could that information be given in a human-type way? I mean, I know that you were a guest on one of the ESOT webinars that I hosted on the metaverse, and, you know, one of your esteemed colleagues was talking about VR and AI, all put together. So we're talking about virtual reality doctors on the screen, holograms virtually telling... Is this where we're going? Is this where the empathy comes in?
Empathy is a funny thing, because I think empathy, to a certain degree, is a false construct. So they are another blasphemy. When politicians see constituents on the campaign trail, is their sense of empathy and engagement 100% legitimate? Of course not. Sometimes clinicians see patients and have to put on a face that is contrived in the face of adversity, and I think that we will see that evolve. I think that empathy will become part and parcel of these large language models to the degree that we'll begin to think of not only their IQ but their EQ.
John, let me challenge you on this, because you're right, empathy is variable, and what you describe happens in reality in clinic. But isn't that just an expression of time limitation? Because you know you're against the clock, you've got to see 100 patients in the clinic, you haven't got the time to devote to them, and this is why we probably need to move away from that concept of office-based
There
care.
are two tragedies in life. One is getting what you want, the other is not getting it. When I speak with physicians, they say, "If I'm so time constrained. If only I had more time with my patients." I would tell you, as a busy transplant surgeon, do you really want 20 minutes with my Aunt Essie? Do you want to kibitz with her? Is that going to advance care, or is that going to create a contrived notion? I think we have to be fundamentally honest that you don't want more time, you want better time, and that's a big difference.
I think that, you know, I think we can never let the tool get beyond the person and the intent of use. I think that I certainly thought that the day my father was hospitalized in the ICU when the hospital had they turned their EHR on. I saw them struggle with it, and so I had the opportunity to ask them questions. I was on the HIT policy committee at the time, and I was like, well, why wasn't it, you know, why isn't it organized in the way that you think? And they're like, well, you know, because not enough people who had the medical knowledge, who had patient knowledge, who were involved in the development, in the before steps, several steps before, to make sure that the tool served the person, whether it was the nurse in the room or the doctor. And so I think we need to be really cognizant of that. I think the best physicians, when I think about somebody who's empathetic, has learned to quickly read the patient, or has asked, like, what do you need, and has matched that need with tone and time and temperament and type of information. What's empathetic for me, who just likes, you know, bump, 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 we have plenty of time to talk to in a 5-minute visit or whatever, because I present, you know, data like a fellow from all my different devices. We have plenty of time to discuss things. But yes, my mother's visits go a little differently, and her doctor has what she would deem as an empathetic physician, and an encounter would be very different from what I did. So that level of sort of personalization that comes from training and experience.
Right?
Yeah.
Let me come back to Tobias. You said in your talk about, we talked in respect, you mentioned respect, and you talked about how sometimes when you're speaking to the very high-profile clients that you have, and you say, well, don't be silly. And they say, well, and they get upset because they think they were criticising them as being silly, but you're saying, no, you think the ideas are being silly. I mean, how does that translate in the healthcare world? How would you see, leading doctors being told by patients, I think what you're telling me to do is silly?
Yeah. But here's the big problem in society is that you often connect yourself with what you do is who you are. It's not the same thing. You can be a great person, but you can do really, really silly stuff. So you need to separate those different things, and you need to have like an open mindset. And going back, I would like to say something about time, because that is also something that I see a lot. People say, we don't have time, or they say, we don't have money. That's the wrong way to start, because the first question you should ask yourself, do I want to do this or not? The second question is, do I have the competence or not? Because if you want to do it and you have the competence, then you will solve time and money. Never start with time and money. It will never work out.
Time will expand to the amount you have. Elon Musk notoriously said, how long does it take to do that? And someone would come back and say 2 weeks. He'd say, okay, now do it in 1. And I think that squeezing of time is a cauldron of creativity that could act in very, very interesting ways. And the other side of that is, don't mistake intensity for hostility.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we are in the world of disruption. Disruption intrinsically is a difficult word. But if I say that your idea is not good or doesn't fit this, it's not a personal attack.
No.
It's not. And intensity and hostility is
and
so
it goes back to trust, because with very close friends, you have a few of them, and then you can tell them something, and they will say that, and they will probably tell you the truth. And sometimes it hurts, and then you go back and you become angry, but then finally you understand she or he is always right. So I say, so disrespect is, for me, that's respect for real. To be able to be a little bit disrespectful to someone is how you respect someone for real. And you can't do it with people you never met, of course, because it's complicated, but that's how you do it.
Gabby, how does this translate in the healthcare world?
I mean, it's spot on, but the question here is, how do we educate people not to take it personally? Because I think this is the biggest challenge, because if we want, and I agree, innovation means disruption, and disruption means being disrespectful. But people take it personally because that's human nature. So how do we change that?
Complicated, yeah.
How do we that's a key point, because people say, yeah, fair point, let's move on. I take your point and do something different.
How do we manage the horrible human bias against technology? We talk about bias all the time, right? But I think there's a human bias against technology.
John, let me ask you a question, and I'll take it to Tobias. You're a technologist, and you say, well, a bias against technology. But now technology, particularly LLM and AI, has been created by humans with their inherent biases. How do we know that all these new models that may help us are not biased?
They are biased.
Inheriting our biases?
Because I think that when we look at a technology model, we define it by the occasional error. When we look at the human model, we define it by the occasional win or triumph. And I think that's just, it's two different constructs. So I think that we have to look at the frailty of the human system. Doctors make mistakes. They make a lot of mistakes. Well, so do LLMs. That's the nature of the beast. And it's a tool. If I have LLM make a recipe for guacamole and it puts motor oil in it, well, as a chef, I know that's probably not a good idea. But if it says substitute orange for lemon as a citrus ingredient, I can embrace that, because what it does, it provides a cognitive template for human curation. We heard a lot about people saying, I forgot that. A differential diagnosis is great, as long as you think of it. So by giving you a cognitive palette for human curation is where that comes together in a nice way.
Can I add something here? Because this is so interesting, because you said, how are we going to do this if people take it personally? My opinion is that we have been focused too much on why we need to do it and what. We need to focus a lot more on how to do it. And as I see it, it's about telling people, showing them how to do it. And it's not super complicated. It's about understanding if we want to push the innovation envelope. It's all about try to be uncomfortable being uncomfortable. which is very, very hard. And it's unlogical, because why should you
Yes.
do things more complicated than it is? Because that's how you learn. And it's not about creating a situation where it's 100% uncomfortability, because people can't manage that. But can we please put it down? Can we manage 5% uncomfortability?
Part of the struggle with that, though, is that being uncomfortable in the context of clinical medicine means that a life is at risk in instances.
Yeah.
So if I'm making a widget, it's a little bit easier to do. So it's even harder to be uncomfortable with that clinical choice.
And it's
Yeah,
not-
but
it's
we
not-
are already uncomfortable from the beginning, because we are working with something that we don't. This is very complex, so we need to show people how to do it. And once again, I think this is something you can actually train and to learn.
Absolutely. I recognize where I get to a meeting and the things I learned in law school about how to tell people things that they don't want to hear or maybe uncomfortable about have been in many cases far more useful than the fact that I stayed up all night and read the entire review pack of the science and all the appendices. I think though that I've survived an organ transplant. I almost died 3 times. My concern with someone else's comfort is not real high. It's not real high. So, presenting ideas, that's the job of a patient advocate, to make someone uncomfortable, because they have been comfortable doing things that have led to bad outcomes in many cases, or led to less than optimal care coordination. You wouldn't be a patient advocate if you didn't have a point of pain along the journey and thought this could be better, so the patient behind me and the family behind me doesn't have to experience that.
Can I just throw something out there? Gab, this is for you.
I'll forget
We
what I'm
all
going to
know-
say, but yeah, it's all right.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, we all have an internal monologue. And that internal monologue is very important. It's our thought process. It's built around language. Language is the tool. If you don't have language, you really can't think. And from a clinical perspective, that internal monologue drives care. You're thinking, before you articulate it to the tumor board or to a parent, you're thinking. I believe the technology is offering a bridge between the external discussion with your colleagues, patients, and peers to an internal dialogue. Let me take just one quick step back. GPT and the iterative dynamic of that process allows me to think and to learn and go back and forth. Ask the question. Ask more about, how do I best manage this patient? I've got some bad news. They've recently had other bad news. How can I role play with technology to facilitate that? That is not technology that's new. It's in fact, being in Greece, it's the Socratic dialogue. And that's what technology is bringing to an interim step of the internal dialogue as a clinician to help foster outcomes.
John, totally, and I think you're taking it to a different direction, because all of a sudden this is education. This is how you create challenges. We're talking about being uncomfortable. All three of you just gave me the answer to my question. How do we make progress? We make clinicians uncomfortable. And as a clinician, I'll probably not be popular by saying this, but we need to be challenged more often in a nice way, not challenge aggressively, because no one likes that. It's about challenging our thought. Why this? Why that? By patient. You get challenged once, you think differently. You get challenged twice. Next time when the third patient comes in, you articulate it in a different way. And this is where your model comes in, because that articulation happens in a non-clinical scenario where you get to think about what you're going to do and how you're going to, and you remodel your experience, you remodel your interaction.
And is technology now sharing some of the cognitive heavy lifting that gives you more time with your patient? It gives you a more humanistic perspective? So to me, I think the game is changing in drastic and extraordinary ways.
I think that I hope everyone hears that message of the curation, of that need for curation, particularly now in that danger zone, period where things are new. And yes, there are some errors, and I think we need to perhaps reset our expectations of this technology, just like we reset our expectations of people. But that, sort of a learned someone, or someone who knows enough to be like, that's not actually right, and so we need to ask a new question or redraft that. That's very, very necessary. And I wanted to say to you, Gabby, you really created the essential step to, successfully challenging someone, asking a question, rather than sort of confronting them, you're wrong or whatever. Well, what would it take to do something? Or have you thought about this? Or what would happen if we did this, and sort of bringing somebody along your thought process with you is often a way that can be, successfully, without people's, feeling defensive, that you're rocking this new path together.
Absolutely spot on there, because it's a question of how you ask and how you bring people along, because there's such a non-confrontational way to ask a question or to challenge that actually is a very polite way and get you to think rather than be defensive, and that's what we need to do. And I hope the journey we started with ESOT, with this meeting, with shared dare to ask questions and all this, it's the first step in the way, but it's an evolution. It'll take time, and I think it's a little bit like what one of our previous presidents said, it's a first follower. Someone needs to start, you got a follower, and all of a sudden you've got a posse following, and all of a sudden you made a change. And I think we're very passionate about this in ESOT, as you can tell, and I think these conversations are what we really want to do, to change that, to make that cognitive shift, really.
Let me move on to a couple of other subjects now. So, disruption and disruptive innovation. I mean, surely xenotransplantation is the most disruptive innovation. We're going to be talking about it tomorrow in great detail, I think. Any thoughts on that? On using animals' organs in humans? I mean, it's a massive subject. Donna, did you want to kick off?
Well, I've been in the position of being offered a xenotransplant, and determined with my family and others that it wasn't right for me. But I think like 3D printing and some other things, it's an advance to see. One thing, though, I feel that we often get really excited about new things, or things that are innovative, new drugs, new treatments, when we haven't really fully utilized everything that we do know. Most patients do not get 100% of patients are not treated for their hypertension, for example, and so go on to develop kidney disease. What if we gave people the things that we already had and got better at that, got really innovative about delivering what we already know? And I think AI can definitely help with that, delivering the treatments that we have, and then fill the gaps from there.
Yeah, Tobias, do you want to come in?
Yeah, but I think that's really, really correct. And I also think we need to shift from this very short-term perspective to a long-term perspective, because when we are solving and working with those very complicated issues or complex issues, we need to approach it from a long-term perspective. And the system, the system today is designed and rigged for a very short-term perspective.
John, did you have anything you wanted to bring into that?
I mean, with respect to xenotransplantation, we're using porcine valves from pigs without blinking. So I think that the push is there, and I think obviously it's perspective of both sides. If you can, my proposition is that early prevention, mediated by technology, early disease detection, is really the way to go. Yeah. But because let's face it, organ transplantation is a device of clinical failure. Yeah. So that in a way are we focusing on the failure and ways of substituting that, or are we trying to advance it in new directions?
Yeah. And I wanted to pick up something, come on, actually, Gary, come.
So
come to you first.
Is it the most disruptive innovation?
Yeah.
Probably not if you look at innovation in general, but it is one of the most disruptive currently in transplantation, because we made progress. But I think Donna's right, and it's a philosophy that I also believe in. Before you start and get into the Rolls Royce, you need to start walking first. You need to be able to do the basics right. If you get the basics right, then every house you build, it'll be solid. And I like Tobias's analogy of and.
Yeah.
It's not xenotransplantation or. It's actually and. And it starts with donation. At the end of the day, it's, whether we like it or not, it is the best thing at the moment we have. Now, Xeno has many things. We'll discuss a lot of societal impact in this particular meeting, because how do you fit this in an overall construct where some people may not want it, may be against it, but actually it frees organs for others to have access. So it's a question of in all this we do, and I think that's going to be the future. But we need to get the basics right in many, many respects.
Sure.
But again, to a certain degree, that comes down to the idea of innovation, disruptive innovation perhaps, and incrementalism.
Totally.
And incrementalism can often be the death sentence to innovation, because we're going to just step by step gradually do this and put those other solutions a little bit out of our grasp.
Well, John, you know that humans are creatures of habit and they don't want to radical change, but actually you are right. I think we need that disruptive innovation that punctuates the progress, the slow progress.
The phrase that I use all the time is, it's the way I was trained.
Yeah.
It's the way I was trained. You know, I mean, my wife makes chicken soup a certain way. I want to say, why don't you put a little more X or Y? And she's like, it's the way my mom did it. It's human nature. And I think clinicians, that's the way I do an A-line, right? That's the way I secure a suture, I lock it, I do one more, and then the rest are just to let me sleep at night, right? So
I think that is so spot on, and perhaps that's why patients are so good at disruptive innovation, because as I say often to my husband, they didn't teach me that in law school. You might have at least passed by it in medical school, so come on board, we're going to work this problem together.
Yeah.
So that is having, and every business has, well, we've always done it like this, and it needs to be pushed back and challenged every way.
I'm gonna turn to Matthias, because that's what we've always done it. Is that a group dynamic? Is there an individual innovator? Is there a Thomas Edison? Is there a Nikola Tesla that actually is the catalyst for that? Or do we find that group dynamic is really the prevailing driver of innovation and change?
Tobias, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's the group dynamic, of course. And the problem is that we have a society where we have put all those people, like all those geniuses, on a pedestal. Often white male guys on a pedestal, worshipping them, like Albert Einstein. He was sitting alone and getting this spark from God. That was never ever true. He attended so many conferences, so he was smart. He was a genius. But
1905 was a pretty good year for him.
Yeah, but also, so the thing is that if you look upon, for example, speaking about details about Albert Einstein, he spent time with a lot of people in the background in mathematics and physics, but he also took time to spend with people outside the field of mathematics and physics. That's what made him much more powerful than the others.
Yeah.
Once again, it has always been about collaboration, but we didn't tell people the story. We sold the story almost like this was some kind of game, some kind of sport, putting, you have the winner. That was never the case. And in a game, that's fun. You can play with winners and losers. But in real life, we need to start telling people the truth.
That's why collaboration is so good here at ESOT, and we're all together and can be discussing these kind of issues. Donna, make your point, and then I want to move on to a couple of other things before we finish.
I really just wanted to say that Tobias hits on many important points, but two that I feel are really essential for our team of advocates. One, the yes and, to the point where we now, I've completed several levels of improv, and now the team has improv classes as part of their training. So they're trained in yes and. So to your question about is it the group, we're creating a group that can lean into and has the tools to do yes and to build on ideas. And the other is about the diversity, certainly gender, racial, geography, as we look at global organization, but of perspective and of thought. There was, it's Fashion Week in New York, and one of the earliest African American models was talking about how she didn't really need Fashion Week. Everybody in her neighborhood had style that they created on their own, and that was of a sort. And so I think that confidence in the expertise and that diversity of thinking can take a lot of different forms if you're willing to be open and think about it.
I just wanted to touch on something that you mentioned in your speech earlier on, Donna. You talked about people who need or are candidates for living donation almost having to find their own donors. Can you explain what you mean by that? 'Cause that to me sounded very worrying and a difficult conundrum.
So there are, and I've been involved in, committee service on, professional standards for a very long time, and saw the dawn of living donation as an advance, as something really important. But it is troubling to me from the first time that I saw, patients using, social media and being asked, and that's great, and we all chip in. But I always thought, what about if you weren't social media savvy? What about the person who had that same need but didn't have a friend at a public relations firm, or didn't have a large church network to be able to. How is that equitable? How is that fair? And so, right now in a lot of, center sites, I was approached on, on LinkedIn, and it's really just become pervasive. We have one person who testified before Congress, and she's had to create a whole campaign with a T-shirt and a QR code, and will you post for it so that she can get a kidney? And I just feel that we can all collectively do better.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Okay. Now, I feel we should give some time to Gabby to talk about the kind of disruptive innovations that you've made with this year's Congress. There are a number of different new things. There's I think it's the fishbowl sessions. Am I getting that? Goldfish bowl sessions, fishbowl sessions, solutions. What kind of things are you doing differently this year?
So
and what did you learn from Milan? Because obviously that was a...
I think it's difficult when you take over a Congress to innovate, because ESOT has been at the forefront of innovation. And you always find difficult things to say, what am I going to do different?
Yeah.
So for me, the key change was actually changing the narrative in a sense of dialogue.
Yeah.
And it's about communication. It's about having that constructive dialogue, disrespectful dialogue, if you want, where we learn from each other. And the traditional format will never help you that, because people come in, listen, they take notes, go home, then they fight with their colleagues to try and implement things that they learn. Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. But here is different. So the fishbowl is very much about you listen to the experts and you challenge. It's about challenging concepts and changing your own perceptions. So that's what the fishbowl concept is. And then obviously dare to learn. We all go to conferences. Not many people dare put their hands up and ask the question. And how do we break that barrier? Because those are the guys that will make the change at home, So there it's a dare to ask, because we are in a part of Europe where transplantation is potentially not massively developed. And one of the key missions of ESOT is to level that equity of access and expertise. So one of the things we were keen to do in this Congress is dare to ask. So you share the knowledge across the piece. We brought AI. So 82 countries represented here. Not everyone speaks perfect English. You can listen to the Congress in your own language. And this is undone before. So it is really making it easily and widely available. It's leveling up. I think it's a word that I don't particularly like, because you level up. You need peaks because you need the innovators, you need the disruptors.
Yeah.
But we need to move to a world where we all do the same things. And Donna is absolutely right about the challenges. That is a sign of desperation, but we can do better because we need to do things differently, so patients don't have to beg on social media. And it's a question of how together we make that environment.
Yeah. And I think in terms of innovation, there's a live international multidisciplinary, is that from Sri Lanka? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah,
What's happening?
So it's along the same line. It's about sharing expertise. And I think one thing that I'm very proud of our community in ESOT is our diversity, and that is not necessarily in the trivial sense. It's diversity in every sense, and it brings together professionals and patients now, which is really important, from all walks of life with different experience and expertise and knowledge, and we want to share that knowledge. And I think this is a great way of leveraging technology to actually reach where before it was impossible to reach. And getting to Athens for some countries is very difficult, despite having 82 represented here. But someone needs to stay behind on the show floor and do the transplants.
That's true.
So therefore, we have to bring it to them. Here is different. Here is trying to encourage communication, expertise, and ask for advice. So it's a question of, when you reach someone who you can trust.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I just want to go around the table just to ask for a final thought in terms of, what the people here at ESOT can take away, do you think, from your thoughts on disruptive innovation and the use of technology. Tobias, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I would like to connect that to Gabby's about trust, because trust may sound very complicated, and it is in one way, but trust is created when your action mirror your words. We need to walk the talk. And that's probably the hardest way to live your life, to really do this thing. I really like that you are not just talking about it, you're actually trying to do something about it. And by trying to do it, you will learn. And it will be tough for you. So you are doing this a little bit more uncomfortable for you than you need to. But it's something that is really, really good. So once again, we need to deconstruct those very, very important ingredients. And trust is very, very important, because without trust, then the rest doesn't matter.
Yeah. Thank you, Tobias. What about you, John?
Well, I think trust has to be extended to technology. And I think that the nature of trust is fundamental, because the cognitive capability of AI is in many ways and will soon eclipse that of the clinician. I know it's a tricky construct, but it will eclipse that of the physician, and therefore the partnership between technology and humanity is no longer an option, but it's fundamentally and essential to driving care.
Thank you, John. Donna, what about you?
I think the message that I most want to get across is the incredible numbers of places where partnership is possible and very needed. Often there's just such a small window in our thinking about, oh, I work with patients on this. But there is really no part of healthcare or technology that should be without the person who's, if you build a bridge, you want somebody who's actually walked across the bridge involved in the process.
Thank you. Gabby, what about you? Final word.
I'm going to be slightly different here, and I say, actually, I want people not to be afraid. And not to be afraid to challenge dogma, not to be afraid to embrace innovation and AI. It's not a threat. I think it's a question of how we educate and spread the message. Don't be afraid of partnership. No one's here to take the jobs. No one's here to threaten the position we are in. I think we all got there because of hard work. But actually, it's time to think differently. It's time to be creative and actually think together, because it's not about physicians. It's not about systems making money. Actually, it's about people. And I think that's the key word here.
Thanks, Gabby. Well, it's just been a terrific session. It really has. And my head is spinning with all the thoughts that have been going around. I think, what I take from the session earlier on, the plenary, was, what John was saying about how we're in the fifth industrial age. We're in the age of cognition. Or cognitive cognition, and that's something that will stick with me. But also something that will stick with me with Vasilios, who made a few remarks at the opening. He's talked about how everyone who's someone's here, and everybody who will be somebody is here. And I'm sure that implies to my esteemed guests here and other people who are attending ESOT. It's been a fantastic day to start off what's going to be a fantastic few days. So please do join us tomorrow. We'll be back here in the TV studio at 9:30. We'll be hearing a lot of different subjects, so please join us then. But thanks a lot for listening, and have a good evening.